Ignition. Liftoff.
Falcon 9 has cleared the tower.
Ten, 9, 8.
Side booster ignition.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening. It's Saturday, May 15th, and you're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 as it awaits its 6:56 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center. My name is Kate Tice, a senior certification engineer here at SpaceX, joining you from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California. You're watching a live webcast for our 28th Starlink mission and our 15th mission of this year. If you've been following Starlink development, then you know that Starlink is a constellation of multiple satellites that orbit the planet at about 550 kilometers and have the potential to service the entire globe. Because Starlink doesn't rely on traditional ground infrastructure, it's ideally suited for areas of the globe where connectivity has typically been a challenge or non-existent, rural or remote communities. Tonight's launch also marks the second SpaceX rideshare mission of 2021. So instead of the 60 Starlink satellites we typically launch, tonight we'll reduce that number to 52 Starlink satellites to make room for 2 payloads from our customers, Capella Space and Tyvak. Capella Space is launching a Synthetic Aperture Radar, or SAR, satellite into low Earth orbit to join its growing constellation of 24/7 all-weather Earth observation satellites. Capella's automated systems collect very high-resolution, high-speed imagery of the planet's surface. Following deployment on SpaceX's Transporter-1 mission earlier this year, the Capella constellation covered breaking global events at night and through clouds, including the Ever Given's blockage of the Suez Canal and the recent volcanic eruption on St. Vincent. Once fully commissioned, each additional satellite provides Capella's government and commercial customers with more capacity and increasingly timely SAR data. SpaceX offers multiple launch opportunities each month for small satellites to ride to space on existing low Earth orbit missions, and we're excited to have both Capella Space and Tyvak along for the ride tonight. We're currently approaching the T-minus 10-minute mark from liftoff, so with that, let's take a closer look at the rocket on your screen.
I'm Ian McCullough, a sourcing manager here at SpaceX. You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9. Our 2-stage launch vehicle stands about 70 meters tall, and when it is fully fueled, it'll hold just over 1 million pounds of propellant that the vehicle will burn through in less than 3 minutes after liftoff. The bottom two-thirds of the vehicle is the first stage. Tonight will be its 8th flight and 4th flight of the year so far. The stage's maiden flight was the Crew Demo 2 about a year ago. Since then, it supported the ANASIS-II mission, CRS-21, Transporter-1, and 3 other Starlink missions. Its objective is to accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere to space and then separate from the rest of the rocket. Once the first stage separates from the second stage, it will make its way back to Earth and target a landing on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. To give some perspective, our drone ships are the equivalent of the size of a football field, and the landing area is approximately 200 feet by 150 feet. That's big enough that a hockey rink could fit inside of it. If successful, it will mark our 84th recovery of an Orbital-class rocket. Above the first stage is the second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine that ignites after the first stage separates. At full power, the Merlin vacuum engine operates with the greatest efficiency for an American-made hydrocarbon rocket engine. The second stage is what will carry our Starlink satellites to orbit. At the top of the rocket, you'll also notice a large nose cone. This is called the fairing. The fairing houses the Starlink satellites and protects them until the vehicle is outside of the Earth's atmosphere, at which point the fairing separates to expose the satellites to space. Today, we will be using a flight-proven fairing, and this will be the second flight for each fairing. And we'll be attempting to recover each from the water today with our recovery vessel, Sheila Bordelon. Lastly, the large truss structure you see there is the Transporter Erector, or TE. We use it to roll the rocket out to the pad and raise it to its vertical launch position. The TE also routes the vehicle's fluids, power, and telemetry umbilicals from the ground systems to the rocket and satellites until F9 goes on internal power and clears the pad. At liftoff, it will retract in order to clear the way for Falcon 9's ascent. At T-minus 8 minutes, let's take a look at how we're progressing in the countdown.
The chief engineer held a technical poll at T-minus 1 hour, and the launch director held a propellant load and launch go-no-go poll at T-minus 38 minutes. Falcon 9 has been loading propellant since T-minus 35 minutes. Our fuel is a refined form of kerosene known as Rocket Propellant 1, or RP1. Our oxidizer is a super chilled liquid called LOX. We chill it well below the boiling point, which densifies the LOX so we can load more of it into Falcon 9. We've also begun helium loading. The vehicle uses helium gas as a pressurant in the fuel and LOX tanks. As the Merlin engine pumps pull RP1 and LOX out of the tanks, we fill that empty volume, known as the ullage, with helium that's heated up by the engines. Heating the helium helps expand it to fill the propellant tanks. And to make sure that startup goes well, we also perform what's called engine chill. Right about now at T-minus 7 minutes, we're flowing a small amount of that super chilled liquid oxygen into the 9 Merlin engine turbopumps. We do this to avoid any thermal shock to the system when the full flow of super chilled LOX hits the prop system. The vehicle is healthy and we're currently tracking no issues. The range is green to support, and as for weather, beautiful shot there of our launch site. It's a gorgeous day in Florida. We were predicted 70% favorable conditions for launch. Main concerns being liftoff winds and cumulus clouds around the launch site, as well as recovery zone winds, but everything is looking in bounds for now. So, all systems continue to be go for a liftoff at 6:56 p.m. Eastern Time. If for some reason we don't get to launch today, we have a backup opportunity tomorrow at 6:34 p.m.
Reload
Eastern.
is complete.
Today, more than 18 million Americans live in areas without access to high-speed internet. For many communities that historically have had poor or non-existent connections to internet, the impacts of the current pandemic made day-to-day life even more challenging. One such community that has been underserved are the residents of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. This week, the city announced that it's participating in our beta program by offering 50 rural homes and businesses Starlink connectivity. These users will now be able to access high-speed internet for work-related purposes, accessing healthcare remotely, and receiving an online education. Currently, our Starlink beta service is available in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Western Germany, the South Island in New Zealand, Austria, and France. And as of this week, we are excited to announce that we are now serving parts of the Netherlands. As we continue to grow our Starlink beta program and customer base, we are also building and expanding our infrastructure. Earlier this week, we announced that SpaceX will be locating our Starlink ground stations within Google Cloud data center properties in order to deliver secure and high-speed internet connectivity for our users. Locating ground stations at data centers will significantly improve latency as data can go from the user terminal to the server without touching the internet. To learn more about Starlink or to find out if service is available in your area, head on over to starlink.com.
We're currently at T-minus 4 minutes and 40 seconds from liftoff, and Falcon 9 is now moving into the final stages of the countdown. The next visual milestone will be retraction of the transporter erector, or TE. That's the white painted structure that you see there next to the vehicle. As the name indicates, that's what we use to transport the vehicle from the hangar to the pad and raise it to its vertical launch position. First, we'll see the TE clamps open. That should be coming up in just a few seconds. And then the TE will begin to retract away from the rocket slightly. At T0, the hydraulics pull the TE further away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off. And if you look closely, you can see those clamps beginning to open now. The TE provides liquids, gases, electrical connections to the second stage, as well as air conditioning to the payload fairing. The first and second stages are both nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. The super chilled liquid oxygen is our propellant oxidizer and is the source of the white clouds that we can start to see forming around Falcon 9. That happens when the warm, humid Florida air comes into contact with the cold liquid oxygen. The oxygen heats up and then turns into the white gas clouds that we can start to see. The first stage will be finishing prop loading here in about 15 seconds at T-minus 3 minutes, and the second stage wraps up its prop load at T-minus 2 minutes. At T-minus 60 seconds, we'll hear the call out that Falcon 9 is in startup. This means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers have taken over the launch countdown. Then, just inside T-minus 2 seconds, we light the Merlin M1D engines. We use TTEB as our ignition fluid. When it mixes with oxygen, it burns a bright green colored flame, so be sure to watch out for that. We then allow the fuel...
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
All right, and there we heard the call out that stage 1 LOX load is complete. Stage 2 continues to load its LOX. As I was saying, after we use TTEB to ignite the Merlin engines, we then allow full flow of the fuel into the thrust chambers, and then the engine comes up to power for liftoff at T0. At this point, the Starlink payload continues to be healthy. The F9 team is tracking no issues on the rocket. Weather continues to look gorgeous, and the range has cleared the surrounding ground, water, and airspace and are green for launch just 2 minutes from now.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
All right, there we heard the call out that stage 2 LOX load is complete. This means that Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with all propellants on both stages. If you look at the shadow of the rocket there on the pad, we can see the shadow of the white clouds that are forming around the pad. Like I mentioned before, that's just the liquid oxygen vaporizing with the ambient air. Now that LOX load is complete and though that propellant line is blocked off to the vehicle, that leftover LOX in the lines basically turn into gas and form the white clouds that we see.
Flight computers in startup.
All right, there we heard the call out that the flight computers are in startup. This means that the autonomous flight computer has taken over the launch countdown. And at this point, both first and second stage are beginning to pressurize for launch.
Falcon 9, Starlink, LDs go for launch.
All right, there we heard our launch director give the final
30 seconds.
There we heard the launch director give our final go for launch. And at this point in time, all systems are go. Let's listen in to the terminal count and watch as Falcon 9 takes our stack of Starlink satellites and 2 ride shares into space.
15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff.
Falcon 9 is pitching downrange.
As you can see, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from the historic launch pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center,
telemetry,
carrying our stack of Starlink satellites and 2 ride shares into orbit. We throttle the engines down in preparation for max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure. This is the largest structural load that the vehicle sees during
supersonic.
This is the largest structural load that the vehicle sees during ascent, so slowing the vehicle down helps during that short period.
Max Q.
All right, there we heard the call out that we reached max Q. In about a minute, we're going to have 3 events happening back to back. First will be main engine cutoff, or as you'll hear it called out, MECO. This is where all 9 M1D engines shut off and slow the vehicle down in preparation for the second event, stage separation. As the name suggests, this is where the first stage separates from the second stage, with stage 1 starting to make its way back to Earth for landing on our
started,
while stage 2 continues its journey with the third event, SES-1, or second engine start 1. This is where MVAC will light up and begin to propel the second stage along with the Starlink and 2 rideshare satellites into orbit. So just a few seconds ago, we heard the call out that MVAC chill has begun. That's the same thing as what I described prior to liftoff for the M1D engines. We flow a little bit of that super chilled liquid oxygen into the turbopump of the MVAC engine, helping to prepare the prop system for that super cold fluid to flow through. So there we can see that the engine...
Stage separation confirmed.
All right, so on the left-hand side of your screen, we got the first stage, and the second, on the right-hand side, the second stage, and there we heard call out MVAC ignition. We can see that nozzle begin to develop a lovely orange glow as Earth rotates in the background. And on the left-hand side, we got first stage deploying the grid fins in preparation for the drone ship landing. In just a few seconds, we're going to have fairing deploy. Love that view of MVAC. And there's our first view inside the payload fairing. There we have visual and call out there that fairing separation has occurred. As a reminder, we will be attempting to recover those fairing halves today with our recovery ship, Sheila Bordelon. And of course, we're going to be recovering the first stage with our drone ship, utilizing a view for today's recovery attempt.
Acquisition of signal, Bermuda.
As Stage 2 heads towards its targeted drop-off orbit, Stage 1 will execute 2 burns in order to make its way back to Earth. The first is the entry burn, where 3 of the Merlin 1D engines will reignite. This helps to slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. The second burn is the landing burn, and this is a single engine burn that brings the vehicle speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship. We do this at the last minute to conserve as much fuel as possible. If you're just catching up with us, we had a successful launch of Falcon 9 from Kennedy Space Center's Pad 39A. On the right side of your screen, you're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 Stage 2 as it delivers our Starlink and rideshare payloads to orbit. On the left, Stage 1 is cruising back to our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, in the Atlantic Ocean. Our Starlink satellites are in LEO, or low Earth orbit, at around 550
Both
kilometers.
vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
Most satellites are around 36,000 kilometers in altitude at GEO or geostationary orbit. When the satellites are further from Earth, the round-trip data time between the user and the satellite, also known as latency, is much higher, resulting in poor performance for activities like video calls and online gaming. About a minute out here from entry burn. On the left-hand see the first stage as it cruises in. Falcon 9 is equipped with 4 hypersonic grid fins positioned near the top of the first stage. The stage uses nothing but the grid fins for steering as it makes its return to Earth. They orient the rocket during re-entry and guide the rocket during descent. Occasionally, you'll also see some white puffs. These are nitrogen gas bursts for attitude adjustment and control. Now we're about 20 seconds out from entry burn. As a reminder, this is a 3-engine burn that is meant to slow the first stage as it hits the thicker parts of the Earth's atmosphere.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn has started. And Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
And we just had a confirmation of Stage 1 entry burn cutoff. Now we're about 60 seconds away from landing, and at this point the vehicle is traveling around 900 miles per hour. This really puts the deceleration into perspective. In the span of less than a minute, we will have slowed from twice the speed of a jet all the way down to 0 as the rocket lands. There are a couple of events scheduled to happen in close proximity here. The Stage 1 landing burn will begin and will finish its burn in about 25 seconds. And then Stage 2 up in space will stop firing about 15 seconds later, at which point we'll enter the first coast period, so prepare for that in about 45 seconds.
Stage 1 is transonic.
Got a great view of both the first stage re-entering into the Atlantic and Stage 2 as it continues on a nominal orbit.
Stage 1 landing burn has started.
Got a start of Stage 1. As a reminder, We may lose coverage of the vehicle as it attempts to land on the drone ship.
Landing legs have deployed.
Landing leg deployed.
Stage 2 FTS is
On the
safe.
left-hand side of the screen, got a beautiful view of a successful landing. This marks our 84th successful recovery of an orbital-class rocket and the 6th recovery of this particular booster.
Tico.
And there we had second engine cutoff 1, or SECO 1. Waiting for a confirmation of good orbit.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And there the team confirmed good orbit. Now, stage 2 is going to coast in this orbit for the next 45 minutes or so. While that happens, take a look at this animation showcasing where we are in the coast phase. We'll see you back here at T plus 54 minutes for a second stage relight and the deployment of our 2 ride shares on board today.
Expected loss of signal, Bermuda.
boggle the mind and mind. And the technology interrupted.
Expected loss of signal, Newfoundland. Acquisition of signal, Coonhilly, England. Detected loss of signal, Goonhilly, England. Acquisition of signal, Diego Garcia. Detector loss of signal, Diego Garcia. Acquisition of signal, Western Australia.
Welcome back to the webcast for our 28th Starlink mission. Quick recap for those that have just joined us. We had an on-time liftoff at 6:56 p.m. Eastern Time from Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center, a nominal Stage 1 ascent, and a picture-perfect landing on our drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean. Of course, I still love you. And Stage 2 is in a nominal coast. We're currently waiting for the relight of our second stage, known as SES-II, and that'll be coming up in just under 10 seconds. This is going to be a quick burn of our MVAC engine, lasting roughly 5 seconds or so. Got some nice ground track views there. Hopefully be able to bring you back that second stage footage momentarily. And there, we got it now.
MVAC reignition. SECO 2.
All right, so there, as you saw, confirmation of both the relight and the cutoff of that second engine, just a few seconds, like I said, and we're waiting to hear that we're in a good orbit.
Orbit insertion.
All right, so there, we heard it. We're in a good orbit. Now, as a reminder, we have 2 ride shares on board today, one for Capella Space and the other for Tyvak. In just under 2 minutes, we'll have our first rideshare deployment for Capella. Capella Space is launching a synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, satellite into low Earth orbit to join its growing constellation of 24/7 all-weather Earth observation satellites. Capella's automated systems collect very high-resolution, high-speed imagery of the planet's surface to help its customers make more informed economic, environmental, and policy decisions with reliable information. Following deployment on our Transporter-1 mission in January earlier this year, the Capella constellation covered breaking global events at night and through clouds, including the Ever Given's blockage of the Suez Canal and the recent volcanic eruption on St. Vincent. Once fully commissioned, each additional satellite provides Capella's government and commercial customers with more capacity and increasingly timely SAR data. Deployment of that synthetic aperture radar satellite will be coming up in about 23 seconds. There we have a great view of the Starlink satellites, which we will be deploying later on. And of course, beautiful planet Earth rotating below.
Spacecraft deploy confirmed.
All right, so there we heard the call out that we had successful deployment of that synthetic aperture radar satellite for Capella Space. Next up, we'll deploy the rideshare satellite for Tyvak, and that'll take place a few seconds after the T+1 hour mark. For those that are just joining us, we just deployed the synthetic aperture radar a couple minutes ago for Capella Space. And next up, we'll have the deployment for our second rideshare, Tyvak. And later on, around the T+1 hour and 30-minute mark, we'll be deploying our batch of Starlink satellites. Beautiful view of those Starlink satellites there on your screen now.
Acquisition of signal, Tasmania.
For those who may not be aware, SpaceX offers opportunities for small satellites to ride to space on existing low Earth orbit missions. This is known as a rideshare. By doing so, we're able to provide launch opportunities a couple times a month for these smaller satellites. Like I mentioned earlier, instead of the usual 60 Starlink satellites that we typically launch, we've reduced that number to 52 Starlink satellites in order to make room for today's 2 rideshare payloads. We've already deployed the first of those 2 payloads, and the second one, this time for Tyvak, will be coming up in about 30 seconds. All right, deployment of the Tyvak rideshare satellite coming up in just a couple seconds.
Forward, spacecraft deploy confirmed.
All right, there we heard the call out that second rideshare satellite has been deployed. So now, stage 2 is going to coast in this orbit for the next 37 minutes or so before we deploy our Starlink satellites. While this happens, sit back and enjoy some more space jams. We'll see you back here at T+1 hour and 37 minutes.
Expected loss of signal, Western Australia. Expected loss of signal, Tasmania. Acquisition of signal, Vandenberg. Acquisition of signal, South Texas.
Hi, and welcome back to our webcast for our 28th Starlink mission and 15th mission so far this year. As a recap, we've had an on-time liftoff from our Kennedy Space Center Pad 39A. Our first stage booster landed for its 8th time and 84th recovery overall. Stage 2 completed its 2 burns, and we deployed our 2 ride shares. One correction on the deployment sequence. The first deployment was for our customer tieback, and the second deployment was for our synthetic aperture radar satellite for Capella Space. Now that we're coming up on deployment of our Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit, or LEO,
Acquisition of signal, Cape.
let's listen in for the call out of payload deploy.
Starlink deploy confirmed.
And we've confirmed deploy of the Starlink satellites. Now you can see the Starlink satellites out in space drifting away from the second stage. As a reminder, this is just their drop-off orbit. Shortly, they will deploy their solar array, and over the next few days and weeks, they will distance themselves from each other and use their onboard ion thrusters to make their way into operational orbit.
And with that, we'll bring our webcast to a close for today. Thank you to the Range and FAA for supporting today's mission. If you're interested in Starlink service, head over to starlink.com and sign up. Thanks for joining us, and have a good evening.